It's a Monday edition of Locked On Grizzlies. As a Commanders fan, I promise I'm not going to cry. I'm not going to be sad because it's over. I'm going to smile because it happened. And I'm going to smile because DeMichael Cole and I are back together talking big wins over the weekend for the Memphis Grizzlies, a big game tonight in the Big Apple. And is Luke Kennard safe from a trade? All that and more coming up on this edition of the show. Let's lock in.
You are Locked On Grizzlies, your daily Memphis Grizzlies podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
We hope you had a good weekend here on Locked On Grizzlies. It is I, one of your hosts, Joe Mullinax, joined by my co-host, DeMichael Cole of the Commercial Appeal there in Memphis, Tennessee. I am a contributor for Grizzly, and I also am our lead writer for our newsletter that you'll hear us talk about throughout the episode. Between the two of us, you've got a couple of guys who have covered Grizzlies basketball here, there, and everywhere for over a decade plus. We are happy to have you with us talking Memphis Grizzlies hoops on this edition of Locked On Grizzlies. Today's episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by FanDuel. Super Bowl 59 is here. I thought I was over it, but I'm not. And there's no better way to make every play more exciting than with FanDuel Sportsbook. New customers can bet just $5, and if you win, you'll score $200 in bonus bets. Download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started. We're free and available wherever you get podcasts as proud members of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team each and every single day. Like, comment, rate, review, subscribe on Apple, Spotify, Amazon, YouTube. Literally anywhere you get a podcast, you can catch DeMichael and I on Locked On Grizzlies each and every time an episode comes out. You can also check out LockedOnDaily.com. Click on the Locked On Grizzlies tab and subscribe to our free daily newsletter. It's not just Grizzlies words from me almost every day. It's NBA words on the league at large. It's fantasy basketball advice. And it is, each and every day, some written analysis from yours truly. I'm a big fan of our newsletter. I'm enjoying it immensely. Hopefully, you are enjoying it as well if you're a subscriber. Again, it's free. Sent to your inbox each and every day. LockedOnDaily.com is where you go to subscribe. DeMichael, you had front row seats this weekend to a couple of butt whippings, right? You saw the Memphis Grizzlies win by double digits against both the New Orleans Pelicans and the Utah Jazz. From your seat there on press row, which one of those two games was most impressive to you? Who really stood out and shined? We're going to talk about Luke Kennard later on in the show, so maybe we save him for later. But Jaren Jackson Jr. led the team in scoring both games. Desmond Bane had 14 assists against the Pelicans. John Morant came back and had a strong showing against the Utah Jazz. And what I really liked about the Utah game, partner, Jaren Jackson Jr. led the team in scoring. Desmond Bane led the team in rebounds with 9. John Morant led the team in assists with 7. When your three best players are contributing at a high level, whether it's the Utah Jazz or anybody else in the NBA, the Memphis Grizzlies are going to be tough to beat.
Yeah, the first one was very impressive to me, beating the Pelicans the way they did, taking control in that game. After, at halftime, they trailed the Pels 71-62. Just to go on to win, I think it was by 13 points, 139-126, if I'm not mistaken. But Desmond Bane, like you said, really controlled the game. He's just done a terrific job. The last two starts for Desmond Bane at point guard, when John Morant has been inactive, he's had 28 assists, 14 assists in this last game. And then you go back to last week, the previous week when they played the San Antonio Spurs and John missed the game. Dez had 14 assists in that one as well. And when I think of those defenses, the Pelicans and Spurs, two, for the most part, completely different constructed defenses. But at the same time, Desmond Bane still was able to be that high-level facilitator. We talk about the importance of him as a secondary, facilitator to take the pressure off of John Morant. And he's here for it. Like Taylor Jenkins after the game brought up a great point about the fact that, Dez going into his second year, you remember, Joe, they sent him to Summer League and they kind of put him in these the idea was to put him in uncomfortable situations. We're going to make you a point guard here because it's going to eventually make you a better playmaker later in your career. And Taylor Jenkins talked about how Desmond Bane has gotten so much comfortable with those used to be uncomfortable situations. And that's a good way to put it. That win definitely stood out to me. 71-62, you trailed at the half. They tightened some things up. Desmond Bane played really well. We know Luke Kennard I mean, he shot the ball like a madman in that game. Then you had a bunch of other, factors in there as well. Jaren Jackson Jr. had a slow start in the first half. He also turned it on in the second half as well as Dez. So there was a lot to take away from that game. That game was also, Zach Edey's first double-digit scoring game in the month of January. So against the Pelicans, snapped the streak of 10 straight games of Zach Edey scoring in single digits. Before that, we talked about it on previous shows. And, Joe, some of our listeners that are at the game, shout out to the listeners that be at FedEx Forum and always come check in with me. But it was a couple of our listeners pointed out, they said, man, y'all were a little tough on Zach Edey. And I said, hey, look how he played. Look how he played as a result. You got 2 games in a row where Zach Edey was in double figures after it was 10 straight games of him not being this level of a factor. So the first game really stands out to me, Joe, but the second one was impressive too, getting the win, against, what was clearly, a lesser opponent, so to speak, but you took care of business. Result wasn't in doubt.
Stacking wins is what's most important, right? Being in a position to pick up the wins. You can only play the schedule that's in front of you, right? And it all kind of balances out. Memphis has one of the toughest schedules in the NBA to close out the campaign, and we'll talk more about that here in a moment. But I believe they are currently on a 6-game winning streak. The Memphis Grizzlies are, which is fantastic. Obviously, these 2 wins over the weekend helped with that. That puts them right back in the thick of things, tied at the top, or not at the top, second seed in the Western Conference with the Houston Rockets, which is, again, impressive in and of itself. Houston has a better win percentage because Houston has played a couple less games, fewer games. And they also have the tiebreaker. So really, the Grizzlies are the 3 seed. But for them to be back 6.5 games from the Thunder, just like the Rockets are, they're stacking wins. And obviously, the Grizzlies will see Houston again later this week. We'll talk more about that, I'm sure. I'm curious, partner, when you watch Edey play, we were hard on Edey, but the reason that I'm hard on Edey is, we'll talk about trades again here in a second. More and more people have been bringing up the idea of trading for a big and trading for a big. I feel like trading for a big at this stage is giving up on Zach Edey. He is literally right there. Maybe not giving up on him long term, right? But you're giving up on him. You're essentially saying he's not going to be what you need him to be this season. I am not prepared to say that because I see a big who is getting more comfortable, who is finding his footing. It might be a calculated risk, but I think it's one that they need to take to keep investing minutes in Edey so that he can be ready for these games coming up in April and May, where in the past we've been concerned about Steven Adams or Jonas Valanciunas getting played off the floor. That certainly could happen with Zach Edey too, but you can't, if you're going to cash in some chips and go all in like more and more people are saying the Grizzlies should do, I'm not sure some of that draft capital in particular should be spent on a big when Zach Edey is right there.
For me, I just didn't like the way that they were using him. And still, honestly, even after a couple of good games, I still don't like some of the ways that they use him. But, I understand the plan. I completely understand the plan that the Grizzlies have for Zach Edey and the way they want him to kind of evolve into more than a back-to-the-basket guy. Makes complete sense. But, if you ask me, is that the ideal guy that I would have wanted to kind of evolve into that type of player? No, not for me. But at the same time, it makes sense. We just saw him make a couple threes in this last game. So, look, he's playing well, with that perimeter-oriented game a little bit more. But look, Zach Edey is your guy. Like, I trade for a big, all that. I mean, insurance, I guess. But you ain't going to get another guy out there that's 7'4", 300 pounds, who can move like Zach Edey. And I think, again, a lot of his problems come with the speed of the game. You see a lot of times he's posting guys up and he as soon as he puts the ball down, so another defender comes, either from the weak side or the strong side, and they're swiping it out of his hands. And even last game, even though he didn't have a turnover, there was a sequence where a ball was swiped out of his hand when he was trying to post up, and he just, he hustled, he recovered, he dived on the floor, got that ball, but it was almost a turnover. So it's a little speed of the game nuances like that. When you're playing those elite teams, they'll pick those things apart. But I've said it all along. If you go back to our very first videos where we talked about Zach Edey and even the idea of him coming to Memphis, if you go back and look at those videos, Joe, what you'll see is the fact that Zach Edey always said, simplify his game here. Simplify his game in Memphis. Focus on the rebounding. Focus on the putbacks. You got Ja Morant, Desmond Bane, Jaren Jackson Jr. Desmond Bane's been averaging 20-plus points this month. Ja Morant has been averaging that for the season. Jaren Jackson Jr. has been averaging that for the season. You got three guys who every night could potentially combine for 60 points or more in a playoff game when they're playing 30-plus minutes. So you don't really need the scoring as much. You want him to take advantage of the mismatches, but you don't need it as much. But what we've seen in these last couple games is Zach Edey's been comfortable knocking down the threes. They're making a more concerted effort, which is very important to point out. They're making more of an effort when they see him to get him the ball. I pointed out that first game against the Pelicans. You know what else I liked about that game, Joe? Jaren Jackson Jr., 7 assists. I know you loved that.
7 assists.
I know you loved it. You talk about it as much as anyone, Joe. And Jaren working on the high-low passing. He was very effective getting the ball to Zach Edey a couple times in those sequences. And that's what can separate the Grizzlies from a bunch of teams, having those two bigs and teams try to front Zach Edey and Jaren Jackson Jr. being able to make those passes. So they made more of a concerted effort to get him the ball over the weekend.
Jaren Jackson Jr. solidified himself as a second-team All-NBA player over the weekend, at least in my opinion. I saw that a couple other places as well. Jaren continues to cook. Desmond Bane, again, we can leave the silliness of sixth man Desmond Bane in the past. Ja Morant. Availability is the biggest issue with Ja this year, right? When Ja's been on the court, he's been a pretty solid basketball player, aside from the turnovers. But again, with a high-usage player like Ja, that of all the turnover concerns we have, Ja's the one that we're the least concerned about, or at least the one I'm least concerned about. Let DeMichael and I know in the comments how you're feeling after the winning weekend, the 6-game winning streak on the line tonight in New York. We'll talk about that later on in the show. But coming up first, we are going to discuss Luke Kennard once more. He had an amazing weekend. He's had an amazing month of January. Is Luke Kennard too valuable to trade for the Memphis Grizzlies? We'll talk about that next here on the show. Stick around. Today's episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by FanDuel. Super Bowl 59 is here. One game, two teams, which are not my Washington Commanders. Endless possibilities, and there's no better way to make every play more exciting than with FanDuel Sportsbook. Whether it's predicting the first touchdown, calling the MVP, hopefully predicting a Philadelphia Eagles loss, or even betting on the coin toss, FanDuel makes it easy to get in on the action. With live betting all game long, you can adjust your bets as the game unfolds and feel the thrill from kickoff to the final whistle. I'm choking thinking of the Eagles in the Super Bowl. The live betting feature is fun. The app is super easy to navigate, and you know that you can place a $5 bet and potentially win $200 in bonus bets for the Super Bowl. That's icing on the cake. Download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started. Bet just $5, and if you win, you'll score $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Bet with FanDuel, an official partner of Super Bowl 59. That's kind of cool. I guess I'll watch the Super Bowl, even though my Commanders aren't in it. I'm going to get over it by the end of the week. That's my promise. I'm going to do my best.
It takes time, Joe. I know
to not mention it by the end of the week.
So anyway, a Packers fan who's lost 4 consecutive NFC Championship games. So.
You and I can both agree that the Eagles are trash, and we want them to lose, or at least I want them to lose. Maybe you don't agree with that, but it still hurts. Anyway. Something that doesn't hurt is watching Luke Kennard play basketball right now. Partner, we talked about this a little bit before the show began. In the month of January, Luke Kennard is shooting an obscene 55% from beyond the arc. And notice I said this is in the month of January. This is across 263 minutes played, according to Basketball Reference. This guy has shot 63s on the month and has made 33 of them. He has 43 assists across 11 games. You do the math there. That's almost 4 assists a game. He has 13 turnovers. That's a little bit high, right? But still close to a 4-to-1 turnover to assist. Right. And he has had higher usage, as you alluded to, much higher, actually, compared to what he normally has. He's right at 17% for the month of January. Again, this is per Basketball Reference. He has an offensive rating of 142. An offensive rating of 142. And for the entire season, going to cleaning the glass now, points per shot attempts. This is the total points scored per 100 shot attempts. Again, this is cleaningtheglass.com. Luke Kennard is at 138 points per 100 shot attempts. That is in the 100th percentile in the NBA among combo guards. What does 100th percentile mean? That means that there are very few, if any, combo guards in the NBA scoring the basketball the way that Luke Kennard is. I provide all of this evidence to you, Memphis Grizzlies beat writer for the Commercial Appeal, to ask you a simple question. Is Luke Kennard safe from trade from the Memphis Grizzlies? Has he ventured into the realm of too valuable to trade compared to what the Memphis Grizzlies may get in return for him?
This is always so tough because I appreciate Luke Kennard. Joe, you've been a big proponent of Luke Kennard, and I think I think to a decent degree I have been too. You know, I feel like him getting hurt in that series against the Lakers was very big for Memphis. But with all that being said, I'm not gonna get. It's a big sample size what he's done this month, but there's more missing from the picture here. And if we just take this month in particular, and we just go with some certain games here. So you remember they beat the Mavs. They won that game. The Mavs were missing a couple of the big dogs or whatever the case may be. Luke Kennard, 13 points, 3 of 5 3-point shooting. Okay, that's solid, right? But what about when they played Houston? Because I'm thinking about the playoffs. 11 points, 3 of 5 3-pointers, 25 minutes played. Then what about when you played the Minnesota Timberwolves that next game? 11 points, 2 of 4 on 3-pointers. And then what about the next game against Houston? 10 minutes, 4 points, 0 of 1 on 3-pointers. So kind of disappeared. But since that, you know, when he played the Spurs, right, that's when the numbers start to tick up. 15 points, 17 points, 5 of 9 from 3-pointers. The 2 7 3-point made games were against the Pelicans and the Hornets. But there's a game mixed in between these games. Remember what I just said, 2 games against the Spurs, 15 and 17 points. Then there's the game against the Hornets and the Pelicans, where he had 23 and 27 points. There's 1 game sandwiched in between those, and that's MLK Day. After the 2 games against the Spurs, it was MLK Day against the Minnesota Timberwolves. Luke Kennard, 20 minutes, 7 points, 1 of 2 from 3-point range. Joe, you know where I'm going here. And look, I got to be a realist on this one. He's not completely safe. If Luke Kennard's on this roster after the trade deadline, no sweat. You go into the playoffs with one of the best shooters in the NBA. You know when he's on the floor, teams have to account for him. You mentioned the numbers. The numbers are validated. We can see with our eyes when Luke Kennard is on the floor, he has to be accounted for. And the Grizzlies offense as a whole, we've seen Desmond Bane and Ja Morant play well together. Desmond Bane and Luke Kennard, those two have put up some really strong numbers as the starting backcourt for the Grizzlies in those recent 2 games that I talked about. But if you notice across the month, games against Houston, games against the Timberwolves, that's those. We talk about it a lot, Joe. Those are those playoff defenses. Those are the teams like, you know, we've seen him struggle against the Clippers, right? We've seen him struggle against the Lakers, even in that playoff series. I think the impact was very noticeable when he was in there. The Lakers had to honor him as a 3-point shooter, but that does not mean that they didn't pretty much almost eliminate him. You know, his shooting. They now, by eliminating him, you know, the Grizzlies were able to get some other things or whatever. But Luke Kennard wasn't, you know, making 5, 6 3-pointers per game out there when he was playing against the Lakers in that playoff series. He's not safe. Now, and that doesn't, I didn't even get into the whole part about, you know, it being the final year of his contract and you have, you know, some in-house guys, you know, especially coming back here sometimes. So Vince Williams, maybe even a Marcus Smart if you're not trading him. But you also have Jalen Wells who could end up picking up more minutes, you know, eventually. Look, Luke Kennard is a terrific player, one of the best shooters in the NBA. I know you like to point that out a lot, Joe. But I won't mark him completely safe because at the end of the day, we've seen this before. We saw Luke Kennard his first year. You remember when he first joined the Grizzlies and he had that hot month of March where he couldn't miss. And he had a game. I don't remember if his record is 9 or 10 threes, Joe, but he had a game where he made 9 or 10 threes, Grizzlies franchise record, basically. He set a Grizzlies franchise record with made 3-pointers. And then the playoffs got here against the Lakers. And what did we see? We didn't see, you know, him creating that type of freedom. So the point that I'm making is you don't mark him safe because of what he's doing against the Spurs, the Pelicans, and the Hornets. You mark him safe because of what he's doing against the Rockets, the Timberwolves, what he's going to do against a nice Knicks defense, What is he going to do, Thursday when you play the Rockets? That's how you mark him safe. What is he going to do when you play the Bucks on Sunday? Dominate against those type of defenses. My eyes are open a little bit more. I'm not beating Charlotte doesn't move the needle to me, but yeah.
What I think it does, at least for me, is it means if I am Memphis, if I'm Zach Kleiman, I am leading off conversations with a Marcus Smart, John Conchar package. Those two and draft picks. That is the start for me now. The Dorian Finney-Smith package that was Kennard instead, no. The reason I'm okay with that is because Marcus Smart is an idea, right? We've seen him in flashes with the Grizzlies. At this stage, I forget, it might have been Fast Break Breakfast who posted it. I think it was Keith.
Mm-hmm.
Jay Huff has played more games as a member of the Memphis Grizzlies than Marcus Smart has. Like, at some point, we just have to acknowledge that it's not working. And beyond that, it's not necessarily anybody's fault. We don't know what we have. So you can take that salary, find an expiring contract, or find someone that can help you that the money makes a little bit more sense. Tag Conchar with it to get another long-term deal off the books if you're worried about Jaren's next contract. That helps you in that regard. And you start there. If a team says, no, we need Kennard, and it's a deal that you really think moves the needle, you move Kennard because you have Vince Williams Jr. and Cam Spencer and guys like that waiting in the wings. But I do think it changes the calculus what the baseline is now. I think it's Smart and Conchar. I don't think it's Kennard and Conchar anymore, at least for me. And again, that's not even Marcus. I want to stress that's not Marcus Smart's fault. It just is what it is at this point.
Now, it is also harder to make that money work too because Marcus Smart's contract is bigger. So
so that means you're going for a bigger contract, a bigger piece of the pie.
Exactly.
That is significant. So I don't think it makes Kennard safe. Neither does DeMichael. What do you guys think? Again, Luke is having a heck of a run. I do think it changes the calculus of what the baseline offer is now. But
agreed.
Less than 2 weeks to go in the trade deadline. The Jimmy Butler stuff is the rumor that won't die. Maybe we'll talk about that later on this week. I don't really feel like talking about it, but clicks and downloads and all that stuff. When we come back here on Locked On Grizzlies, we're going to close out this episode of the show talking about the Knicks game tonight. Memphis is in the Big Apple, Madison Square Garden, taking on the Knicks. Talk about it next. Stick around. Welcome back to Locked On Grizzlies. I am Joe Mullinax, joined by DeMichael Cole of the Commercial Appeal there in Memphis, Tennessee. We are your co-hosts for Locked On Grizzlies, and we're finishing up this Monday edition of the show talking about Grizzlies Knicks, a big game tonight for Memphis. And it's the start of a run that I'm going solo tomorrow, partner. So I think I'll talk more about this on my solo show tomorrow. But they are about to start a run of games that I believe is going to define their season. Okay, the month of February, late January, this is the most significant month of the season so far coming up for the Grizzlies. So I'll use that as a little bit of I forgot I'm going solo tomorrow. So I'll save that for my tomorrow content. But let's dive into this first game of that stretch that I'm referencing against the Knicks. Memphis is in a position where they should compete. They could get guys like Santi Aldama, Jake LaRavia back. I believe they're both questionable for the contest. The Knicks have some banged up injury type of things themselves. Yeah. But Memphis on their own winning streak. We mentioned the 6-game run. The Knicks have won 4 of their last 5. They beat the tar out of the Sacramento Kings, which is an impressive win given how Sacramento's been playing recently. 23-point win. You can argue that the Knicks have the best starting 5 in the NBA. I think most folks would. It'd be hard to argue against that.
2 all-star starters, yeah.
Absolutely. You got Karl-Anthony Towns, Jalen Brunson, both starting that game. Mikal Bridges, OG Anunoby, Josh Hart making up that top starting 5. The depth is a little bit different, right? And I do think the Grizzlies are deeper than the Knicks. But that starting 5 and Tom Thibodeau, the head coach of the New York Knicks, not afraid to play these guys minutes. We talk about wanting Jaren and Ja and them to play more. Josh Hart looks very tired at the end of every game when he's logging 40 minutes a night. But in that Kings game that I mentioned, 20 points, 18 rebounds, 11 assists for Josh Hart. A pretty impressive triple-double. The Knicks are an interesting team. I'm excited to watch this game tonight. What are some things that you're looking forward to checking out in Grizzlies Knicks?
Jalen Wells, this is going to be a game where his imprints, for better or worse, are going to be all over it. I've been watching him closely. I talked to him after a lot of these games, and it's a learning process for him. One, as a rookie, you're not going to get a lot of calls, and we've seen that. We talked about those a couple times in the last 2-minute reports where calls have been deemed incorrect calls, and they've both been gone against Jalen Wells. What should have been offensive fouls when offensive players have pushed him. But with all that being said, he's probably going to be guarding Jalen Brunson, who you can make an argument. I mean, some people, you got Luka, you got the Hardens out there, but you could make the argument that Jalen Brunson is the most crafty player in terms of savviness.
SGA exists too down in Oklahoma City.
Oh yeah. He definitely knows how to get the referees to blow a whistle. So, but Jalen Brunson is one of those. He's in. You agree? He's in that tier, right? Like
Oh, absolutely.
He's in that tier, and
100%.
And Jalen Wells has had those matchups, right? He's gone against Luka, and whatnot. And I feel like he's learning a lot from those tests. This is going to be another big one. I think. I mean, that is who I would have him on. By the way, like I know they got Mikal Bridges, OG Anunoby. They got some talent over there, but I definitely would have Jalen Wells guarding Jalen Brunson and being mindful of the pump fakes, of the swipe throughs, and just of the way that he kind of likes to snake through the middle of the floor. And if you bump him in any direction, he's gonna make sure the refs know that you bumped him. So this is gonna be a good mind game for Jalen Wells, which I think is a good test for him because this is what you're gonna run into pretty much over the course of the playoffs, like those guys that you said. Pretty much in the Western Conference. It's a bunch of them. And we saw it a little bit in that Anthony Edwards game, right? The second one. So the MLK Day game where he got all the free throws and whatnot. And, he was kind of trying to get the refs to make a few calls, say it in a nice way. But with all that being said, that's where it starts for me. So many other storylines. You talked about the Knicks. They're going to play their starters, and they're going to play them heavy minutes. Now, here's my approach, Joe. You don't got to match because Taylor Jenkins is not going to do that. We accept that as reality, and you'll be fine. You don't have to match, but Ja, Dez, Jaren, those guys shouldn't be playing 30 minutes against the Knicks. You play those guys, I think, roughly 34 minutes apiece, I'll be fine. Like, I think 34, 35 minutes. And depending on, game flow is a factor here too. Fouls happen, whatever the case may be. But you can win this game by playing those guys around, somewhere around 34, 35 minutes and having, a staple of reserves to fill the rest of that time. I think you can win this game. If you playing them 31 minutes and we're seeing Jalen Brunson for 40 minutes, you're probably going to lose. So I think that is something that I want to see, how much he plays these guys, not only because you don't ever want to get the vibe that you're matching up to the opponent in a regular season game. Not even because of that. This is a 3-game week for the Grizzlies. You got 2 days in between each game, Joe. Take advantage of it. You play Monday, you get Tuesday and Wednesday before you play Thursday. Even when you play Thursday, you get Friday and Saturday before you play Sunday. Take advantage of it. Ride the starters a little bit more. Pause. Let them play in this game, and everything will be fine.
Excellent use of pause. Well done. I agree with your keys there. It's a good night for the rookies because, Karl Anthony Towns, that playoff series a couple years ago when the Grizzlies and Steven Adams being played off the court by Towns because of the way Towns plays. If Zach Edey is the new Steven Adams, Karl Anthony Towns is playing some of the best basketball of his career. The whole starting for the Eastern Conference thing and the All-Star game or whatever the new look All-Star game is being starting.
He's going to be starting on some team.
He's going to start on somebody's team, right? Whatever the case might be, how Edey responds to that, right? Because you talk about who's going to defend who. Morant being on Josh Hart makes the most sense to me.
Would you start Brandon Clark?
Potentially, and that is something that's going to be really interesting to
against
see.
The Timberwolves. Now that you remind me,
a team that is smaller, right? The Knicks are definitely smaller. Is this a game where Brandon Clark gets that start and Edey plays 15 to 20 minutes off the bench? I think that could be something to keep an eye on. And that's not, again, it's not an indictment of Edey. Steven Adams was an NBA veteran at the point where he was, again, air quotes, played off the court.
Cat put him on the bench. Yeah.
Correct. He was an NBA vet, right? So a guy that had been in the league for a while, widely respected as one of the better maybe not all around, one of the better everything but scoring bigs in the NBA. Edey is not what Adams was then. So do you save Edey from himself in this case and make sure that those minutes against Cat are Clark and Jaren Jackson Jr. heavy, because Cat is such a perimeter-based big? I think that's going to be something interesting to watch as well. So make sure you're watching along with Michael and I on X. I will be writing solo on tomorrow's show, like I said, so we'll talk about that game and so much more. I'll talk about the upcoming stretch for Memphis that I think is the most important of their season so far. We will discuss that and more on our next edition of Locked On Grizzlies, so make sure you're with us on Tuesday for that. Thank you so much for being with us on this edition of the podcast. I appreciate it, as does the Michael. Make sure you're liking, commenting, rating, reviewing, subscribing. Apple, Spotify, Amazon, YouTube, literally anywhere you get podcasts, you can check out Locked On Grizzlies. Make sure that you are subscribing to our free daily newsletter as well, LockedOnDaily.com. Content on the NBA at large, fantasy basketball advice, plus words from me about the Memphis Grizzlies each and every time that a newsletter drops. Check that out and subscribe at LockedOnDaily.com. Again, it's a free daily newsletter, Grizzlies words from me in your inbox. Go Grizzlies, beat the Knicks, get this taste of Commanders football out of my mouth. I'm really excited to watch this game. I do think it's going to be a chess match between Thibodeau and Jenkins. Going to be a fun one. Looking forward to talking about it tomorrow. For DeMichael, I'm Joe. Stay locked in. Enjoy the game. Have a great start to your week, and we'll catch you next time here on Locked On Grizzlies. See ya.